We live during interesting times, my friends, because Victoria 3's current consensus regarding trade policy seems completely up in the air. All I had to do was ask a simple question: which trade policy do you prefer? And it turned into a minor argument between those who were adamant defenders of protectionism and those who demanded the freedom of free trade. I will personally admit I do have my own preference in this matter, but rather than simply stating that one is better than the other, I merely prefer to remind people that I have a very unique niche way of playing Victoria 3 that ends up being better used by certain trade policies. Although, I will once more go out of my way to remind people that this is entirely an opinion-based video. There are no spreadsheets showcasing my work. I am merely a fool trying to guide others through the forest of fools to the golden pond of fools. Anyhow, this intro is dragging on, so I'll just ask you to please like and subscribe. I'll also take a moment to thank my newest YouTube Premium members, Yamangizo2, Kurt, Chuck, Mr. Zynoz, Ed, Nator, and Kang. You guys are truly kings, as are every one of you who helped me keep the lights on through your continued support. I really do appreciate you all. Anyhow, let's get into the video. Perhaps the greatest weakness of mercantilism comes from the fact that you suffer from a negative 25% trade advantage for imports. This means that you'll end up being taken advantage of from other countries who sell you goods, and it can result in a rather nasty trade imbalance if you are not careful. Yet, mercantilism by itself is not a particularly bad law by any measure. It's just overshadowed by others, making it what I lovingly call a stepping stone law. It is one of those laws that the mass majority of smaller countries will start with, and they'll likely want to move on to other, better trade policies after a while. Of course, that does not mean that there is not any situation where players should go out of their way to try and enact mercantilism. For one, if you happen to start with any form of isolationism, you should actively go out and seek law commitment treaties with other countries such as Russia or Austria to give yourself a chance to enact mercantilism. The reasoning for this is actually quite simple. Not only do you get off of the extremely limiting and frankly painful isolationism trade policy law, but you're given the opportunity to gain up to 3 plus 100% technology spread bonuses, giving you a tiny ability to maybe even catch up on a few important and pivotal technologies. Another reason for wanting to either enact or maintain mercantilism comes from the fact that it is in fact endorsed by the landowners, which is one way to keep them slightly happier so they aren't likely to stall on other more important laws that you happen to want to enact. The final reason to stay mercantilism is if you happen to become a purely export-only country that happens to deal in tariffs. This, of course, assumes that you aren't importing important vital resources like oil, wood, or iron, though, which can really hurt your economy by driving up the prices even if you're exporting finished goods at better prices. That might be why I typically suggest people to swap off of mercantilism for the other trade policy laws eventually, preferably when the landowners are nice and weak and you do not care about their endorsement. Here we go. Protectionism. Effectively mercantilism, except better in every single way, excluding the trade advantage penalty for imports and bonus for exports. I suppose it does come with a very sizable bonus towards leverage resistance, but in all likelihood, you are never going to need it if you're already in a position to pass protectionism, which is usually one of the last laws people pass. Chances are you will already have a power block whether you made it yourself or joined somebody else's by choice. In a way, the leverage resistance bonus is actually more of a penalty. Should you actively be seeking to join another country's power block such as Austria or Russia's, you can accidentally exclude yourself from joining simply because there is no way for you to get over 200 leverage, even if you give out all of the important treaties. Still, protectionism is a great law for players who enjoy using tariffs to prop up their economy. It's particularly effective if you happen to have cornered an entire market of goods or prestige goods that other countries are in extreme demand for. Tools and automobiles do come to mind here. Of course, if you own all of South America, Africa, and Indonesia, you can throw rubber into that mix as well. Another one of the benefits of protectionism that people don't really think about comes from the fact that it actually partially appeases the trade unions, which is a good way to keep them happy if you do not plan to go fully communist, but still want their affection when it comes to passing vital laws such as workers' protections and compulsory primary school. Now, without taking sides in the argument, I will freely admit that protectionism is a great law. It is one of those types of laws that you can set and forget for the rest of the game without any real detriment whatsoever. Especially since, unlike free trade, you are still able to use subventions and tariff treaties with other countries to pass treaties that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. Many people consider this to be so pivotal that no free trade bonus could ever make up for this, making protectionism a top tier pick. I am going to go on the record here to state that I am a little bit biased. Even now, in the current 1.11.1 version of Victoria 3, I happen to favor free trade a little too much, so please, take the glazing that I am about to do for this law with a grain of salt. Free trade gives away your ability to use subventions and tariffs in treaties for the sake of a blanket plus 25% trade advantage across the board. This can come off as an extreme penalty for some players, but I have rarely found myself ever needing to pass any treaties by the time that I am ready to take free trade in the first place. Usually, by the time that I am ready to actually take free trade, I am already a great power, so there is no way that I can make use of law commitments. Chances are, I'm already military strong enough to lure other countries that I like into alliances or defensive pacts, and the meager amount of money that you can get from a treaty can pale in comparison to what you're already earning. So the use of subventions and tariffs in treaties becomes moot. That is why I consider free trade to be what I lovingly call an endgame law, the final evolution in a step-by-step process of trade policies. I always swap to protectionism in the early to mid-game, but by the time trade becomes one of my focal points and I begin subventing the export of automobiles, tools, and groceries to overtake other countries' markets, I find free trade to be an absolute dream. I would honestly say the main detriment to free trade comes from the fact that you will no longer be able to make a mint of money off of tariffs, since you will not be able to tariff at all. For a country that relies on tariffs, my suggestion is to not take free trade and to instead stay on protectionism. At the end of the day though, for me, I absolutely adore flooding markets with as many cheap goods as I can. One of my favorite things to do is to overwhelm another country's production of goods to the point where they have to downgrade their factories, leaving you as the only supplier in the world for a good. It is intoxicating being that powerful, especially when you reach a point where you're trading off 500,000 or more of a good. Free trade makes that easier, so I will admit, yes, free trade is still my favorite. Did you know that isolationism actually has a use of Victoria 3's patch 1.11.1? It's not a nice use, in fact, it's a downright exploit that can be used to gain ill-gotten goods in a way that you probably never thought possible. For certain countries, particularly those along Eastern Asia, you are afforded the ability to trade away treaty ports when you're isolationist. This is because other countries want to have access to your country, which affords you a tiny amount of trade in that treaty port state, except only to the country that owns that treaty port. Selling off those treaty ports can actually rake you in some very nice cash. I, myself, have managed to get 99 years of £2,000 off of a single treaty port, for instance. Yet, if you happen to offer a country like Great Britain a treaty, let's say you give them £200, then you renegotiate that treaty to include selling them your treaty ports. In return for 99 years and £7,000, you get to keep the money for 99 years, and they do not get the treaty port. That means you can repeatedly sell those treaty ports to any country that wants to buy them through renegotiating until you are so obscenely wealthy and every great power is consequentially broke that you've become a god king. All you have to do is stay isolationist and you can ruin or rule the world. Of course, after this video, I do expect that little exploit to get patched out, so don't expect it forever, but at the end of the day, isolationism is absolute garbage, and I hate it with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns. I only mention the exploit because there is not much else to talk about regarding this awful law. Isolationism pretty much prevents you from trading entirely. You might get an extra 50% authority, but you lose 50% of your interests, and you suffer a minus 15% tech spread penalty. You can't even build trade centers relying entirely on other countries who own your treaty ports to build them in their treaty port for you to be able to trade at all. I hate this law. I want to get off of it as soon as possible when I start as a country that happens to have it. The Canton System is not what I would consider isolationist by any measure. In a way, it's merely semi-isolationist. The reasoning for me stating this is because you are actually given the ability to build trade centers on Western Guangdong, which is rather strong for a country like Qing. Many people will actually state that the Canton System isn't particularly bad, but I will go out of my way to remind people that it is not particularly good either. In fact, the only reason people will consider the Canton System somewhat good is because Qing starts the game with the ability to trade with Portugal. Plus, if you're smart, you will make sure that the UK will get its hands on a trade port in Western Guangdong as well. In comparison to isolationism though, you are still losing 25% authority since the Canton System only gives you plus 25%. However, you only lose 33% of your interest instead of 50%, plus your tech spread hit is only minus 10% instead of the previous 15% from isolationism. Other than that, I would still go out of my way to get off of the Canton System as early as possible. That is because mercantilism is just infinitely better for a country like Qing, and there is no real reason to stay on the Canton System unless you happen to be role-playing. I would like to thank everybody for watching this far into the video. I do hope this helps you come to terms with which trade policy you'll use for your favorite countries, and I sincerely hope this helps you understand the game just a little bit better. Now, to those of you who are new, I typically do tier lists, rants, and playthroughs. I also now plan on streaming every single day for the month of November, so please, do not hesitate to join us every day at 12 p.m. -7 UTC. You can even join my Discord to see the streaming schedule in your own time zone as it automatically changes for you there. Anyhow, good night, and I hope you still enjoy playing Victoria 3 in spite of my goofiness. Make sure to give your loved ones an extra hug tonight, and always remember, Hail Hydra Cat.